Hoi! Path of Exile 2 has once again announced upcoming features, and there are many things in here that people have been asking for once again, and also some buffs that I specifically like because they affect my playstyle a lot, so let's talk about them. They once again mentioned that there will be more checkpoints and fast travel between them, but more importantly, respecking will be significantly cheaper at higher levels. It had a relatively aggressive curve before, so this should generally result in approximately 40 to 50% less gold for respecking between the start and middle of endgame progression. Very good news, especially for those of you who want to test builds. The trial of the Sekhemas had a few problems and is getting some adjustments. Honor damage now scales down based on the distance to enemies. When in close range, you'll take 35% less honor damage, and that just tapers off if you go further away. They fixed a bug where damage over time was dealing thrice as much damage to honor as intended, and a bug where honor resistance was only applying to 2/3 of that damage. This was especially noticeable with traps. Skitter golems no longer use basic attacks and instead now just explode. Sounds like you still want to be careful with that. Serpent Clan's Burrow and Ambush attack now has improved visual telegraphing and cannot be used from as far away. Volcanoes created by Relcage's Fisher Slam now last half the duration. This is the first ascension, so it's relatively important for people that this is not too difficult in order to unlock their ascension class. You can of course level up more before attempting this trial instead, and that'll solve that as well, but the volcanoes were a bit too much in terms of how much they covered and how long they lasted. There's some endgame adjustments, especially to maps, that make things a little bit more fair. Maps no longer have additional elemental resistance penalties inherently applied at tier 6 and tier 11 or higher maps. It's now consistent across all of endgame. Chaos damage now scales less aggressively over the endgame. Critical strikes from monsters now deal 40% less bonus damage. They lowered the baseline monster density for breach encounters, primarily by reducing the frequency of the elite monsters appearing. They disabled the Volatile Crystals modifier. They will revisit this in the future, pending telegraphing improvements. It sounds like a lot of people don't want it back at all. Purple explosives created by the Volatile Plants modifier on rare monsters now deal significantly less damage. The Siphon's Flask Charges modifier on monsters now drains 10 times less flask charges per second, so this was unintentionally way too much. Now we're getting to the character and item balance. They've made charm modifiers on belts substantially more common and now appearing at lower levels. The Off Symbolism modifier now appears from level 23 onwards, and the Off Inscription modifier appears from level 61 onwards. Electrocute is now 25% harder to build up, but the damage penalty has been removed from the support gem in return. They added a new lightning damage and electrocute cluster to the passive tree in between the ranger and monk sections. It is now more difficult to chain freeze enemies by reducing the amount of freeze buildup applied after a freeze has been applied. This makes a lot of sense since a lot of the freeze builds were very potent with almost perma freezes. The Hunter's Talisman notable now grants +1 charm slot. The small passive skill leading up to it will now grant the stat it formerly gave. The charm helper text has been updated to indicate that you cannot have more than 3 charm slots unlocked, so that we can add more sources in the future. Next up, skill and support gem balance. Generally, they have nerfed some things so far, and they said they don't want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary, but they also want to buff certain things, and we're getting some buffs here. Improvements to Rolling Slam and all shield skills, especially the mace section. Improvements to various bow skills as well, especially the ones that generate frenzy charges, even though from what I know the bow is not in a bad state overall. Improvements to bone spells and chaos damage over time spells in the occult section. This is exactly the stuff that I'm running, so this is great news for me. I'm surprised that both is getting buffed at the same time. Improvements to various crossbow skills, especially those at higher tiers, and improvements to some of the underachieving quarterstaff abilities. There's some new gems. There's the Tremors support gem, which can be used to give up to multiple more aftershock effects to skills with a damage penalty in return. The Bidding support gem can be used to give more damage to the command skills of supported minions. This could make for some very interesting playstyles. The Fire Exposure, Lightning Exposure, and Cold Exposure gems no longer penalize damage of supported skills. They now instead have a mana cost multiplier of 120, making them a much more viable choice in many situations. There are also some nerfs though. Skeletal Arsonist Spirit now cost matches the other 2 skeleton mages. This should result in a slight decrease in the number of arsonists at a higher level. There's a nerf to the damage over time component of very high levels of tornado and vine arrow. These were never intended to be dealing damage themselves, but more so act in a way for other skills to propagate damage. Magnetic Salvo can now only use your stuck lightning arrows as opposed to those created by your party members. Now the team is now winding down for the holiday season, so we won't see many changes for the rest of the year. Of course, there might be some broken things that appear, that's just part of early access, but overall they're definitely responding to the most urgent concerns that players have. Some bigger things they can of course not address quite as quickly when it comes to the late game overall situation. They can just make certain tweaks and then over time can improve that further. Overall, I'm very happy with these changes here, and we'll see how much my damage changes through that. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified of other upcoming Path of Exile 2 videos. And other than that, thank you very much for watching. Duke Sloth, out.